My husband refused to touch me on our wedding night and says that it's my fault. Our wedding was only 2 weeks ago, and to this day, he still has not touched me. Here's the thing, we had an arranged marriage. My family is extremely traditional, and where we come from, it's normal to have arranged marriages. When I was 12 years old, my parents told me who I was going to end up marrying. This all seemed very normal to me growing up because I saw my sisters and cousins doing it. But now that I'm in this, I realize how terrible it is. My now husband didn't actually grow up in the same country I did. In fact, we had only met a week before the actual wedding. I had a really bad feeling a month before the wedding, though. So I told my parents I did not want to marry him. That's when they told me that if I didn't go through with the marriage, they would disown me. I would have nowhere to live, no money, and no family. So, of course, I agreed to marry him. A week before the wedding, my parents hosted a dinner for his family and mine. When he came in through the door, I was happy to see that he was actually attractive, but he didn't look at me once throughout the whole night. Part 2 is up. My new husband refused to touch me on our wedding night and says it's all my fault. We finally met a week before the wedding. When he came in through the door, I was so happy to see that he was actually attractive. But this man barely looked at me the entire night. Parents presented us to each other and he glanced at me. That was it. He was extremely cold and basically didn't speak to any member of my family. The only person he did speak to was my father, of course. I spent the entire dinner trying to make eye contact with him, but not once did it happen. Thankfully, the dinner only lasted about 2 hours and his parents and him left. As soon as they did, I burst into tears. Also, I know I'm a beautiful girl. I've had many suitors come to my house and ask my parents for my hand in marriage. They had agreed to this arranged marriage so long ago that it never even gave any other guys a chance. The worst part is that one of the guys that asked to marry me a few years ago, he and I went to the same school, got along, and dare I say liked each other. At least he would look me in the face. I told my parents that he didn't even look at me once. My dad said that I was completely overreacting, but my mother agreed with me, thank God. She told my dad that my fiance's behavior was completely unacceptable, and that the least he could have done was at least said hello to me. My mom was also upset that he didn't even say hello to her, and that he was openly disrespecting our family. I tried to convince my dad to cancel the marriage, but he said no. Part 3 is up. My husband refused to touch me on our wedding night and blamed it all on me. He refused to look at me on our wedding day. He didn't even kiss me once. The only time he touched me that night was when the photographer asked us to hold hands for a picture. And even then, the way he grabbed my hand was so cold. When it came time for us to go to our room, I was already very upset. He could tell. We got into the room and I went straight to the shower. I took off my dress, showered, and came out. And when I did, he pretended to be asleep. That's when I grabbed him and turned him around. I asked him why he wouldn't touch me or even look at me. That if he didn't want to marry me, he shouldn't have. That's when he told me that he never really wanted to marry me because he had heard things about me. He said that we had some mutual friends, but he refuses to tell me who these friends are. He claims they told him that I had a secret boyfriend and that I had dated many men, which couldn't be further from the truth. First off, my parents are super strict. The only time I was unchaperoned was in school. And he said, "It's your fault, I will never touch you." I started to cry and I called my parents. I literally ran away from him. I told my parents what he said and thankfully they were on my side. My father says the marriage is void if he refuses to have children with me. But guess what? I started doing some digging and I found out that he was the one seeing other women and men. What should I do? Story time about how I found out my husband was seeing escorts while I was pregnant. Disclaimers are not my story time, was sent me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 6 years. We had tried and tried for a baby, and we had a really hard time. The first 3 years of our marriage was hell. We tried so much to get pregnant, but we just couldn't do it. We went to the doctor, and that's when they told us that my husband had a little problem. So basically, he was the reason why we weren't able to get pregnant easily. Because of this, I had to undergo a lot of treatments. I started taking all this different medication, which really messed with my hormones. For the first time in my life, I got acne, I started to gain weight, and I also started getting mood swings. Unfortunately, my husband for some reason thought this was a character flaw of mine, and that basically I should just be able to control my emotions. I took him to the doctor so that the doctor could explain to him what was happening to my body. Finally, the doctor told him that everything that was happening to me was because of the medicine that I was taking for us to have kids. My husband decided to apologize to me and wanted to take me on a trip. He took me to Hawaii for 2 weeks and it was beautiful. We ended up making up and it was the best time ever. A month later, we found out that I was pregnant. My husband was the happiest I'd ever seen him. 2 weeks later, I started noticing weird things in our bank account. I started sending $5,000 to one person in particular every single story time about how I found out my husband was seeing escorts while I was pregnant. Disclaimers are not my story time, was sent me on Instagram. That's when I noticed that every single month he would send somebody $5,000. It had been happening for 3 months. Right away, I was suspicious. A few months back, he and I had watched a documentary about escorts. And during the documentary, he kept judging all the women and the men. You know, acting greater than thou. And as soon as I saw the payments on our bank account, it's like a light bulb went off in my head. He must have seen that documentary and been like, wow, I know I can do that. Of course he can. My husband is a 40-year-old, good-looking, wealthy man. So that's when I started investigating. I had full access to his laptop, which had all of his text messages, as well as emails, and he never bothered to change his password on any of it. I waited for him to leave to the gym, and that's when I got on his laptop. And I uncovered a whole ring of escorts. Not only was he sending money to one girl through our bank account, he was paying other girls through Bitcoin. As I was crying in front of the laptop, I had the presence of mind to start adding up all the money he had spent. In only 3 months, my husband managed to spend $55,000. And from what I could gather, he had about 5 escorts. Keep in mind, he's doing all of this while I'm pregnant. So here's what I did. I managed to contact each girl and ask for the money back. And I basically threatened to expose them. One was a teacher, the other was a model, which I could contact her agency and accuse her. One was actually a stay-at-home mom who was married. Only one responded to my messages. Part 3 is up. My husband refused to touch me on our wedding night and says that it's my fault. Our wedding was only 2 weeks ago, and to this day, he still has not touched me. Here's the thing, we had an arranged marriage. My family is extremely traditional, and where we come from, it's normal to have arranged marriages. When I was 12 years old, my parents told me who I was going to end up marrying. This all seemed very normal to me growing up because I saw my sisters and cousins doing it. But now that I'm in this, I realize how terrible it is. My now husband didn't actually grow up in the same country I did. In fact, we had only met a week before the actual wedding. I had a really bad feeling a month before the wedding, though. So I told my parents I did not want to marry him. That's when they told me that if I didn't go through with the marriage, they would disown me. I would have nowhere to live, no money, and no family. So, of course, I agreed to marry him. A week before the wedding, my parents hosted a dinner for his family and mine. When he came in through the door, I was happy to see that he was actually attractive, but he didn't look at me once throughout the whole night. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my husband died and his best friend won't leave me alone. Disclaimers is not my story time, send me on Instagram. My husband and I were married for almost a decade. During that time, we had 2 kids. And of course, his passing was completely devastating to our families. And 2 weeks after my husband died, I was still grieving. But his best friend started coming around our house a lot. First, he was very emotional. Him and my husband were best friends for about 7 years. They saw each other almost every day. Not only did they work together, but they also would go to the gym together and pretty much hang out all the time. So I know this guy really, really well. When my husband would invite him over, I never got the feeling that he liked me. I mean, sure, sometimes I caught him staring at me, but I'm beautiful, so I understand. So after my husband passed, he started coming over as in, I want to take care of you, and we would just kind of cry together. I took this as his way of trying to help my husband, you know, so I just thought he was being really sweet. But exactly 1 month after my husband passed away, he started asking me weird questions. Number 1, do you want to start dating again? Number 2, don't you feel lonely at night? Number 3, you're still so young and beautiful, you need to give yourself a chance with someone else. Mind you, I'm still grieving. To these questions, I would usually say no. Obviously, I mean, why would I even be thinking about those things? I didn't put too much mind to the questions, but a few days later, he came over after he had been at a bar. As soon as I opened the door to him, he said, can I kiss you? And then he did without me saying yes. Part 2. Story time about how my dead husband's best friend won't leave me alone. Disclaimers is not my story time, send me on Instagram. As soon as I opened the door, he asked me if he could kiss me and I didn't say anything. And he grabbed me and just started kissing me. Of course, I pushed him away and told him that he needed to leave. That's when he said, but you didn't say no. I told him I didn't say anything because I was shocked he would even ask me that. That's when he walked into the house without me inviting him, went straight to the fridge and opened up a beer. Then he starts yelling at me for giving him mixed signals. He says that since my husband died, all I've been doing is flirting with him. Since when is grieving flirting? I told him that he was completely wrong and that he needed to leave again. Then he said, no, I'm not leaving here until you tell me the truth. That I was secretly in love with him and that I actually wanted to be with him. No, this wasn't funny to me at all. He was slurring his words and barely could stand up. I knew my kids were upstairs, so all I wanted to do was get him out of the house. That's when I grabbed my phone and started texting one of my other husband's best friends. I texted him 911, please come to our house now. He responded right away saying, I'm coming over. After another minute of this guy ranting at me, told him I was sorry for giving him mixed signals and that was never my intention, blah, blah, blah. Then he asked me out on a date. He said that he wanted to take me out and show me a good time. I said no, and I asked him to leave again, but he wouldn't. Finally, someone knocks on the door. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my dead husband's best friend won't leave me alone. Disclaimers is not my story time, send me on Instagram. That's when he asked me out on a date and started walking closer to me. Finally, someone knocked on the door, and it was my other husband's friend who I texted to come help me. I ran over to the door quickly and I opened it. That's when my husband's best friend, who was drunk in my house asking me out on a date, forcing me to kiss him, tells the other guy that he needs to leave. So I asked the other friend if he could just take this guy home. He said, yeah, of course. And he told him, you're drunk, I'm gonna take you home now. They left together without incident and I was really relieved. But after that, I knew to watch my back now. So here's what happened. He started texting me every now and then asking me if I wanted to go to dinner. And I would not even respond to him. And after that, he started showing up to different places I was at. For example, I go to Pilates classes 5 times a week. This place is near my house. And one day he just showed up trying to take a class. As soon as I saw him, I told the instructor and they kicked him out. That's when he came back and said that he did nothing wrong and that he deserved to be in the class too. He even paid the year up front. So they had no choice but to let him in. Instead, I left. Then he followed me outside to the parking lot and told me that I needed to relax. Said it's not like I'm following you, which he clearly was. I got in my car and left. That very same night, he sent me a message apologizing for acting crazy. Then he told me that all he wanted was just to be close to me and the kids. By the way, my kids really do love him. They ask about him all the time since he stopped coming over, and I don't even know what to tell them. After a few weeks of him not acting crazy, he asked me if he could come over and I said yes. Decided to invite all my husband's friends and we had a nice dinner. But again, this guy asked me out. I said no, but my best friend thinks I should give him a shot. He's good looking and rich. What do you guys think?